As Dustcrete or hempcrete or any other similar material dries and cures up, there is some inevitable cracking. And so the way that we're solving this cracking in this sauna is by using tile thinset, because it has polymers that have some elasticity, and then fiberglass tape, which is usually used in drywall jointing. So these two materials, in addition to adding some fiberglass fiber to the scratch coat of our plaster, are going to enable us to isolate these cracks within the Dustcrete layer so that they don't transfer through the plaster. This technique worked very well in this project, and so it's just simply a matter of mixing up a batch of thinset, troweling it into the crack areas after wetting them. Of course, you always want to wet one material before you apply another so that the new material doesn't have all of its moisture immediately sucked up by the dry material behind it. And then just putting our tape in and mudding it over. I'm using a 1/4 by 1/4 notch tile trowel for this. And after I get my mud applied to the wall and get my fiberglass tape embedded, then I'm just coming over with the notched side of the trowel and scratching the surface basically to allow some mechanical bonding of the scratch coat of plaster, which will follow up all of these repairs. So we did this, and we also added corner beads to all the corners. We have that one corner in the back that is particularly horrendous, and so just to get everything super sturdy, we put those corner beads on. You can see they're on the left. And then when it came time for our scratch coat of plaster, I went ahead and wet this entire wall, and we just kind of stayed ahead of our plaster as we were working to make sure that we had a good damp surface ahead of ourselves as we went. But you can see all the cracks we repaired there. So now time to mix some plaster, and this is a very straightforward recipe. 3 parts sand, 1 part type S or hydrated lime. And the lime doesn't need to be slaked or anything ahead of time. It can just be put dry into the mixer. And here are those fiberglass shards. I just put a couple pinches of this in each batch, and that keeps any cracking from transferring from the scratch coat to the finish coat. And then you just want to add enough water to get this to flow nicely in the mixer. It looks about like that. You have plaster. So we dumped this first batch into a bucket, and I showed Stefano a couple of different techniques for applying plaster to a wall, and got him dialed in here so that he could get in there and do the bulk of this. This first coat, you want to go about 3/4 of an inch thick. And you can see that big hole in the corner there that I was talking about. And the way I handled this is I basically just chucked a bunch of plaster into it, and in a couple of courses got it to the point where I could add enough material that it wouldn't slump back out.
The way this works is you're going to turn your trowel upside down, grab your material, keep it horizontal so you meet the surface, and push your up. Okay.
Plastering or stuccoing is a little bit of a tricky skill to manage initially, but once you get a feel for it, it's pretty straightforward and you can move pretty quick. This project certainly gave Stefano a good chance to develop this skill. Then as the plaster begins to set up, I come back in with a scratch board, which is just a piece of wood with some nails driven through it, to add those horizontal grooves that will be a mechanical key for the final coat of plaster. And we got all that trim up ahead of time, so we had something to plaster to. Here I'm just doing a little detail work with the trowel. This took us less than a day to do this base coat, both outside and inside of that changing room in front of the sauna. And again, coming back in with my scratch board. There we have it. The exterior is complete. Stefano's in there working on the inside. And on this, we're looking for relatively flat. It certainly doesn't have to be perfect, but at least a good coverage on everything so that when we come in with our final coat, we can get a good smooth result. So Stefano's just finishing up the rest of that wall, and then we'll get our inside done. Then I came in, I did all the woodwork on the exterior so that we would have a hard edge to plaster to with that final coat. In the next episode, we'll get into all this aspen, tongue and groove, and all of that. But we're ready for a second coat once all of this is installed. And you can see that open eave detail that I was talking about in an earlier video that we left for swallow habitat. And so that exposed outside eave edge basically creates a bunch of nesting boxes for swallows. Now on to the finished coat. Same recipe. It's 3 sand to 1 type S lime. And at this point, Stefano's got a pretty good hang on how to apply this stuff. Yeah, I just showed him a few tricks with different details like corners and edges and things like that. Don't be afraid to lose some of this material on the ground as you're doing this. It's kind of inevitable. But just make sure that any voids are completely filled and that you've got enough material on things like corners that you can do your finished detail. We put a slight bullnose on these in the next step, but he's basically working his way around, and then as the plaster starts to set up and cure, I'll be coming back around with the sponge float to give it a final smoothing and texture. So I'm basically mixing batches for him and he's laying them up. Though it is best to work from the left to the right if you're right-handed, we started in the eastern corner of this building so that we could stay ahead of the sun and get around and get the south side done before the sun was blazing on it. A hot wall makes plastering quite difficult. So this is that sponge float. It's basically just a firm sponge with a handle, and I dip it in a bucket of water. Now you wait to do this until the plaster is beginning to firm up. It's starting to kick off a little bit so that it doesn't all just slough off the wall as I do this. But you want it soft enough that you're able to move material around, and this allows me to take a rough finish and make it flat, level, with a little bit of raised grain from the sand in the mix. Yeah, so this ended up being a pretty nice finish. Anywhere there's plaster on the woodwork can just be removed with a brush. Inside here, we did the same sponge float, but then came back with a trowel again and wet knifed it all flat so that there wasn't any texture from the sand sticking up. So it's a smooth wall instead of the rough wall that we have outside here. But this plaster is super affordable and super durable and breathable. And there we have our finished plaster. Framing plans and material spreadsheets for this project are available in the description below if you're interested in picking up a set. In the next episode, we'll go ahead and install our reflective foil barrier inside of the sauna section, get all those seams taped up, and then add some 3/4 inch furring strips. And upon those, we will hang the aspen tongue and groove we got from the local mill here. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.